We are all here today due to our common understanding of the importance of outdoor public space as a major component of healthy and sustainable urban environments. They are literally an extension of our community and enriches lives of its users and enhances surrounding buildings and neighborhoods. Since some of the audience here today may not know the Toronto Society of Architects, I'll just briefly say that we are a non-for-profit, volunteer-based organization comprised of architects, interns, students, academics, retirees, and basically enthusiasts. TSA plays an advocacy role in the city, ensuring architecture and design are key considerations in public discussions and in processes that have impact on our built environment. You do not have to be an architect to become a member. You just have to be keen and interested in our great city of Toronto. Before I introduce the moderator this evening, I'd like to take time to thank our sponsors and our partners. I want to thank LRI, Fire Protection and Building Code Consulting Engineer. Please contact Nate Simpson if you have any inquiries. And our sponsors and partners at the City of Toronto Parks and Forestry and Recreation, Richard Owens, and the Ontario Association of Landscape Architects, Jane Walsh, and they are going to say a few words at this moment.
I consider it an amazing privilege to stand before such a creative group of people. To me, you know, whenever I address staff in Parks, Forestry, and Recreation at the City of Toronto, I always talk about what we really do. And you think it's cutting grass or maintaining the parks or looking after the trees. It's really about making Toronto a great place, make it look great, and it be a place where people will invest and they will come as tourists and they will participate as community and they will build community together. And that's really what it's all about, and it all starts with, you know, the whole spectrum from design to completion and then ongoing maintenance. And then it's, you know, what do the people do with it? And it's fantastic. So thank you for all for being here. It's a privilege to be here with you. I hope you have a fantastic evening here together, that we all do, and I look forward to hearing the discussions tonight.
Okay, now I'd like to introduce our moderator of this evening, Antonio Gomez-Palacio, founding partner at Dialog, and actually past chair of the Toronto Society of Architects. Thank you, Jason.
So I've let our panelists know that this is the inside crowd, that this is a group of folks with whom we can have an extremely candid conversation. Don't mind the camera. That will be posted later on the website, but forget about that for now. So we really want to have a conversation today where we can drill down, where you can be asking the panelists about what do they think, where they're going to be challenging each other, and really start to recognize that in Toronto we stand at a crossroads. There is a very exciting and interesting moment right now for the public realm, for parks, for trying to reinvent what open spaces are all about in Toronto. And the parks and the systems that worked 20, 30 years ago don't seem to be working right now. And there's an energy, there's a possibility, there's an opportunity for us to be rethinking these spaces. Where are they? How are they located? How are they designed? How are they used? How are they engaged from a number of different perspectives? How do we have a conversation about those? And where baseball diamonds were the norm at a certain point, now we start to see cricket pitches, and we start where we used to see people owning big tracts of backyards. Now we see the emergence of a shared economy where people are really kind of focused on thinking about how they inhabit the city in a different way. Where we had a certain density of population in downtown, that density has doubled and quadrupled. How do we start to reimagine our public open spaces?
So good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's forum on designing Toronto's parks. My name, as was said, is Alex Moot. I am a landscape architect and also supervisor of capital projects at Toronto's Parks, Forestry and Recreation Department. So I've been with the City Parks Department for just over 4 years now. And I'm very pleased to be here tonight to talk about this important topic and to have an engaging discussion. Toronto parks are a vital part of the city, and the stewardship and development is something I'm very proud and excited to be a part of. Through the lens of the Parks Department, this presentation will consider the question, what does good design mean for Toronto parks? So first I'll be framing it with a brief overview of Toronto parks and what they consist of. And second, I'll be identifying some of the challenges and the constraints that the Parks Department faces, maintaining, improving, and acquiring parks and park amenities. And lastly, I'll answer this question from the Parks Department perspective and provide some relevant examples of recent projects, if I have enough time. So, what are Toronto parks? Most often when we think of Toronto parks, we think of the traditional park comprised primarily of open lawns, trees and paths, a place to stroll through, toss a frisbee, maybe have a picnic, or just sit down and relax. But Toronto's parks also include many other environments and amenities that are extremely important to the residents of the city. We have a vast and unique urban ravine system. We have 23 beaches. We have natural landforms such as the Scarborough Bluffs. And we also have the more urban and industrial waterfront consisting of many recent, notable, and very well-designed projects. We have over 850 playgrounds, over 650 sports fields, and various sports courts, including over 600 tennis courts at 200 tennis facilities. There are also over 100 splash pads in the City of Toronto and over 100 wading pools. Over 50 outdoor artificial ice rinks and also 3 skating trails. There's also over 10 combined and single-purpose skateboard and BMX facilities. Over 60 designated dogs off-leash areas, our favorite, and they're growing. Over 55 community garden sites, and also growing. We also have 5 golf courses and 2 ski and snowboard centers, just for good measure. So Toronto parks also consist of a variety of other unique environments and amenities, illustrating the value of good design and creative thinking. Some examples: the Trinity Square Labyrinth. We have Underpass Park, Corktown Common, the recently completed June Colwood Park, and Sherbourne Common, just to note a few. And I'm certain our panelists will have many more examples, including their own works, to share tonight. So, what are the challenges and constraints facing the Parks Department in the maintenance, enhancement, and design improvements and acquisition of parkland? Here are 10 that come to my mind, or that came to my mind, but these certainly aren't all of them. So, budgets. Not only the initial capital budgets and investments in projects, but also the ongoing operational budgets. The bureaucratic processes, which of course I could spend the whole evening talking about, but let's just say that there is a lot of red tape and it's a reality and we need to cut through it if we want to get things done. The state of good repair backlog. When we keep building more and fall behind in repairing what we already have, things literally start to fall apart. We have a lot of ad hoc improvements. When projects are singular in purpose, many contextual improvement opportunities can be missed. This can result in uninspired cookie-cutter type designs. We also have the pressures of densification. Not a citywide problem, but definitely a core issue that can't be ignored, and I'm sure will be discussed further tonight. There's also the distribution of development. Some areas of the city are lacking any significant development funds and the opportunity to augment project budgets. We also have the AODA compliance by 2025. Understanding and fulfilling the requirements of the Access for Ontarians with Disabilities Act will be mandatory for all city projects and is already. There's also competing priorities. It would be great if everyone involved had the same goals for a project, but I think we can all agree that that's very rarely the case. There's also the haves and the have-nots. Often the voice of the haves is heard and it's heard loud and clear, and they usually have the means to realize their goals effectively and push their own agendas. The city has a responsibility to also give voice to the have-nots and to ensure that the needs of these communities are also met. My last one on my list of 10 is politics. Sometimes politics can be a help and sometimes it can be a hindrance, but the politics surrounding every project need to be well understood. This way, advantages can be identified and capitalized on, and negative interference can be mitigated. So, to face these challenges and address the current situation whilst planning for future improvements takes the expertise of many disciplines being brought together and ultimately expressed through good design. So, what are the components of good design? First, we'll say listening. Meaningful and thorough public and stakeholder consultation is very important, and it can't be a token gesture that's quickly forgotten. We need to have clear ongoing communication with all involved from project initiation through completion. Understanding. Prioritizing what was heard and distilling what is truly relevant to the project, not wishing or hoping the project is something that it's not. But at the same time, we need to explore opportunities of how a project might be pushed to achieve something of greater value. Compiling. This is the gathering of all the information needed to inform the design decisions. We need to know what are the applicable laws, the standards, the guidelines, the physical attributes of the site, the history, the context, and the demographics. These will all inform the project, and the design needs to consider address these things to be a success. And lastly, what I like to call knowing. This is where the interesting combination of expertise, experience, creativity come together in knowing what to do with everything gathered in listening, understanding, and compiling. To take all that information and make it into something functional, enduring, relevant, and beautiful, and also preferably on budget, is often a daunting but also extremely rewarding process. So basically, good design equals good luck. So it's hard when you work at the city to resist acronyms. It's just So how am I doing for time? 7 minutes, okay. So following our three, let's call them lesser known examples of smaller projects, so under $500,000 budgets, where we feel good luck prevailed despite the challenges and constraints. So I'm just going to give some quick before and afters and some project highlights. So this is a park in the East End called Felsted Park. And basically this was slated for a play enhancement project. It's a pretty depressing looking place. This wading pool had actually been operational for a period of 15 years. So it had just been sitting there like that for 15 years. So we didn't have a very happy community. This design was developed for this site internally. With myself and Tammy Stewart, and this was actually the first year I was with the city. And what we really wanted to do was try and come up with a design that didn't feel like a cookie cutter playground. We were also fortunate enough to have some additional development funds applied to the project, so we were able to really look at the site and look at what other improvements could be done. One of the most interesting things in this project was what to do with this wading pool. And on doing further investigation, we discovered that the water service and drain were still working. So we thought, how could we express and how could we use this to be an interesting feature? And so what we ended up doing was actually converting half of it into a sandbox, so it has kind of a concrete beach edge, and using the water supply to have water in that sandbox, and to also be able to drain the water from the overflow. So we think this is a really interesting example of a small project where something unique and different and that paid homage to the site was accomplished. This is Sororan Park. This is the project we called the Town Square. This was the site just before when it was acquired by Parks, and this is the base parkland condition that we received it in. The site had been fenced off for a number of years, but a community group led by the Wabash Building Society spearheaded a fundraising effort to try and get this space converted to some sort of usable multi-function space. As I said, most of the monies were fundraised, about 2/3 of the money for the project, and the planning partnership developed this concept for a multifunctional square adjacent to the derelict industrial building. This is the square just after being built, which is about a 25 meter by 25 meter paved surface, permeable paved surface. And this is the square on market day in 2015. So I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to show one last project and just the images of it. So this is another derelict playground in Toronto's East End, very heavily used, lots of community involvement. This is the design plans prepared by Think Design. And this is the playground after. So a real transformation, again, under $500,000 budget. This is the playground in use. Granted, this is on opening day, but it is a very busy playground all the time. And in closing, I would just like to say that good design how good design is achieved is not easily understood or explained. Design complexity and challenges change significantly from project to project, but it is imperative that good design be the goal in every project we undertake. I look forward to the presentations of the other panelists and an engaging discussion to follow. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks so much. And park people is always most excited when there's people like you who want to get out and advocate for your park. And so we'll have a great partnership together. I'm in awe of being on with a panel of such incredibly talented people. Thanks so much for the TSA and OALA for including me in the panel. And I'm particularly thrilled that not only is the Parks Department represented on the panel, but there's such a huge presence here from the Parks Department, and it means so much that they really care and want to be part of the answers and solutions. And I think all the other panelists, I think we've all been on panels before where we all come up with these great solutions that the city should be doing, and there's no one from the city actually there to respond or give some of that context. And it was so fantastic, Alex, to hear all that, because it really puts some of the things that we're saying tonight into that context. So we actually have to come up with solutions. We can't just sort of say, well, the problem is just the city and and everything else will be fixed. So. I'm Dave Harvey. If you don't know Park People, we're an independent charity that's trying to build better communities by making dynamic, animated, improved parks the heart of those communities. We have a very simple motto: when communities get involved, parks get better. And that's communities writ large, so that's residents, that's businesses, that's philanthropy, that's everybody working together to make the parks the best they can be. And for my remarks tonight, I'm going to really talking about that element around community, particularly around those issues of those, as Alex called the have-not communities. Very quickly, what does Park People do to help build that community engagement in parks? There's this network of 110 Park Friends groups. We're in every single ward in the city. We provide those groups with park toolkits, that's guidebooks. We've got park summits, we've got how-to things, we've got park talks, always trying to get them the best educated they can be. We really put a special focus in those have-not communities. We call them underserviced communities. So it's a range of efforts we really try to bring to the areas outside into the inner suburbs. We've got a range of initiatives from our TD Park Builders program, which is micro grants for events and gardens and some initial programming. We've got a great new partnership with the Toronto Arts Council on Arts in the Parks. We've got TIFF movie nights. So it's all about bringing those real opportunities into those underserviced neighborhoods. Oh, I'm just going to jump back here. Yeah, so it's a big city. There are, we say 1,800 parks. Sometimes the number changes from different, but there's a lot of parks out there. 44 wards, good design, how to get the community engaged. It's really different in every ward. It's different in neighborhoods around the city. It's a real challenge to come up with the perfect solution. But what I want to talk about tonight is that design is really vital, but what is so vital for the long-term success of that park is getting community ownership of that design and community ownership of that, so that they're really, community writ large is really buying into what's being done, and that's going to ensure that long-term success. And I just want to talk about a couple of examples of that. So Regent Park, this is the great new park that's the heart of the new revitalization in the neighborhood. There was a great multi-year effort by Daniels Corporation, Toronto Community Housing, Parks, Forestry, and Rec to consult with the community around this. I think in many ways the community got what they were looking for. It's a really fantastic park. But what came up a lot throughout the community consultations was that people wanted programming. They wanted things happening in the parks. They wanted a community garden. They wanted a greenhouse and a bake oven. And so, and the city built the greenhouse, the bake oven, and the community garden. But the effort to how to program that didn't happen until after the park started construction. So there was some frustration with how to find partners to do that. We came in and helped them with the Western Family Parks Challenge grants of $150,000 to create a Friends of Regent Park. There was a number of partners that have been onto it, but it's been a challenging process to get those partners involved in doing that programming. There's been some frustration around it, and to my mind, the real lesson here is that there was a lot of great consultation about the design of the park, but for this community, they wanted a lot of programming in the park, and so there needs to be a lot of effort at that same design stage of how you're going to program the park, who's going to do it, and how is that going to be spent, how are the funds going to be there for that. The city doesn't have the resources to do it, so what partners could be brought in to help that along. With Flemington Park, it's a really interesting neighborhood, the Flemington Park neighborhood, in that it's very spread out. It doesn't really have a heart of the community, and there's a really interesting process that's developing there in Flemington. So it's Food Share working with the local community health clinic, and they've got a grant from Ontario Trillium Foundation to really get out, and they've done this really extensive consultation process over the last year to think about what people want to have happening in their park. It's, as you can sort of see, the park in Flemington Park is a little bit like the whole neighborhood. The park kind of lacks a heart and a soul, and so there's this real effort to what can be done to bring in programming and design features to really turn that into a sort of this green community hub for the neighborhood. So, and again, they're looking at some potential Western funding from us for that, and then starting that process of working with the city, so what could be brought in with those capital dollars. So all this type of consultation and thinking about what could happen in the neighborhood happening long before the actual RFPs are going out, and what could be done with that. So it's a really interesting model that might be coming out of that. The Green Line is a project that we're really helping to drive forward on. It's a 5-kilometer long linear park between Spadina and Lansdowne. And the challenge we've got there is the problem 10 that Alex talked about. It's not politics, but it's the ward system. And there's a real challenge, and I think maybe we're going to talk about some of this in the discussion, that there's 6 different wards that this park goes through. And one of our absolute biggest challenges that the councillors are relatively on side with this, and some are very enthusiastic, but how do you coordinate that work? And the city has a very hard time getting its head around these projects that cross many different ward boundaries. So with such a need with dense neighborhoods to find those solutions and these kind of linear parks that'll cross many very wards, we're going to have to find some ways that we can drive some of these projects forward. This is my favorite park at the moment, Shoreham Walkway. And it's up near Jane and Finch, and it's just one of the saddest, most neglected spaces in the city. The Boys and Girls Club there called us up, and we went up there, and it's got this lousy playground. It had some of the worst garbage that I've ever seen, and one of the residents actually said, this tells us what the city thinks about our neighborhood, just looking at this. And we worked with the Boys and Girls Club, and they actually just sort of took it on themselves, and they've done some movie nights, they've done a whole range of things to start animating the park, because the real challenge is it's not a park. There's some city land, there's some schoolyard land, there's some Toronto community housing land, and there's some private land owned by a private landlord there. The people see it as a park because it's just one big green space, but it's all these various elements of it. So it's a real challenge to pull those things together. So, but with the community starting to move forward with some of these positive projects, there's a real opportunity there. And the lesson there is that, yeah, it'd be great to have some great design and some great capital for them. It's going to be a long time before they get that, but some quick early wins, some small things that can be done to really move that forward. I'm going to fly through some great things that the city is actually doing really, really great jobs. Bake ovens, fire, A lot of cities around North America, no chance of fire anywhere. This is the first outdoor tandoor oven in North America up in RV Burgess Park. We do bake ovens and fire really well. We do natural ice rinks really well, fire and ice. So it's a really easy system. People really can get engaged. The city really helps you out to make that happen. Table tennis. People have been trying to get table tennis going in parks for a long time. Once that first table tennis once it happened up in Mel Aspen Square, the city's really taken off with it. I think we're up to like 40 or 50 of them now across the city. It's just a great success story. Last thing I want to leave you with is this initiative in New York that I think could be an interesting model for us to look here. So particularly with these have-not neighborhoods, our capital planning for parks it's a long, we know 2 or 3 years out what's going to be done there. And in New York, they've got the same process. And what they do is the Parks Department works with community partners to start that community engagement process early on in those have-not neighborhoods. They are challenging neighborhoods to work in, so it builds up that community capacity. So when they are going to put out that RFP and doing that park, there's a Park Friends group there. They've had some positive community events there, so that when that design team comes in to do that capital project, it's really getting ready for that community ownership to come together. So I'm going to wrap it up, but bottom line is that we need community ownership to make these designs that we all love to be successful for the long term, and Park People is here to not only work with the city to make that happen, but to work with you as professionals to make that happen as well. So thanks very much.
Great, thank you very much. I think this is great to actually get the OALA and the TSA together. I think that's a starter right there in terms of the kinds of discussions we need to have. And when I first started to talk to the TSA about an event like this, the thought was how can the design community become connected to have more connections with the Parks Department and with parks generally? How do we engage? So I'm going to give three possible ways the design community can actually assist and aid and work with the city in creating great parks. So the first one was something that Janet Rosenberg and I started several years ago, but we threw a huge conference in Toronto last year for the Cultural Landscape Foundation. And the reason for doing that was the issue of what I call landscape literacy. So the idea was we need to know more about our parks. We need to understand them better. We need to know more about them. We need to really take stock of them, appreciate them, understand where they've come from. And so this was the conference was called the second wave of modernism, and was looking at the introduction of modernism into park design. But at the same point, what we did was make a record. We produced a publication which is online called What's Out There. And in that publication, we documented dozens and dozens of parks and open spaces. So that database is now available. It came as a part of the conference, but it's a database that connects to literally hundreds of other North American cities. So you can track landscape architects, you can track designs through that larger database. We're on to Montreal soon, so we're going to put Montreal. But this was the first Canadian one. The conference had more than 500 people. It was the largest conference the Cultural Landscape Foundation actually organized. The idea was to really start to talk about the culture of parks, the design of parks. We had very significant designers, Thomas Woltz, Claude Cormier, others came to speak at the conference. And we also did a recording of the pioneers, the actual designers of our parks. So it's very difficult. My background is primarily historical, working with heritage architecture. It's really difficult to work with a resource if you don't know anything about it, if you don't know where it came from, what its original design intent was, what the ideas were behind it. And in fact, we have a really rich resource. I put this list up here thinking maybe lots of people won't even know who these names are, but they should become pretty much household names. We should know who our landscape architects who the designers are, what their intent was with the designs that they had. And so take a look anytime. There's now this Toronto guide. But the idea behind that conference was again literacy. The idea that the design community could understand its own interests better, it could understand its own history better, and then have a stronger sense of ways to collaborate. The second way is engagement. So a group of us, and I think there's a number of our board members from Friends of Allan Gardens here tonight, said, well, why don't we look after a park? And why don't we understand the park, look at it from, why was it designed the way it is? Why is it the way it is now? What's the evolution of that park, and how could we look after it? And that becomes a very multifaceted way to engage. And we're finding this is happening, as Dave's mentioned, this is happening in many different ways. I would say the one difference we're thinking of is with Allan Gardens, we're thinking it is a significant cultural resource that we're trying to enhance and trying to understand fully before we take any kinds of actions. I put, actually, Dave Harvey did a booklet called Fertile Ground for New Thinking, and it's fantastic. So Dave, I had to put the slide in here. 5 points: put the community first, move from a culture of no to a culture of yes, capitalize on creative funding ideas, use food as a tool to engage people in parks, develop a citywide voice for parks. And I think those are very fundamental principles to work from. So we looked at the Allan Gardens Master Plan done in 2006, and that's 10 years ago, pretty much. And we said, well, how much of this plan is actually functioning and working? How do you move forward? Master plans are tend to be actually fairly rigid documents, and 10 years out you're going, are we still in agreement with this plan? Is it still working the way we want it to work? And how does it actually unfold? So we've now started a working relationship with the Parks Department to refresh this plan, to look at how do we engage the community around us? How do we look at what new ideas might be out there? How do we actually check in that we're doing the right thing? So this is a little view of Allan Gardens at the back. There's a proposal, a green spot. There's a city proposed artist gardens, but right beside that's a temporary works yard for loading. Doesn't seem like a happy coexistence going on there. There's a children's playground that has been built. And there's a phrase that designers don't like to use, but in parks terms it's plop and drop, where some new use comes forward and boy, it's just plopped there. And it may be driven by the community, it may be driven by a politician, but it's often without a sense of understanding the overall evolution of the site or the history of the site or the design. And so this is just a schematic idea. We said, well, why don't we do something like that, where we connect the greenhouses with new greenhouses. That greenhouse would be about the same size as the greenhouse that's Witchwood Car Barns, and it could further enhance the horticultural program that's at Allan Gardens, plus add a cafe, plus work with others in the neighborhood, including Ryerson University that has an urban agriculture program. So there could be a way of taking the master plan and gradually letting it evolve and coming forward with some newer ideas that could be in part funded by private sector interests. And that's just a view of the potential cross-section through the Palm House to a new greenhouse. That new greenhouse could be anything. The third idea is, so that was literacy, engagement, and the third idea is design. And I'll go through this fairly quickly because Antonio's holding up a sign. No, okay. 7 minutes. Oh, okay. Well, I'll end quickly because we've got to talk about things too. So, the third one is design, and so I wanted to put this forward. It's called High Performance Landscape Guidelines: The 21st Century Parks for New York. It's a project from the Design Trust for Public Space and the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation. An amazing document. It came out in 2010. And what it is looking at parks through a whole new series of lenses. Now, New York was driven to this partly because of climate change and the concerns they had with flooding, storms, and sea levels. And so there was a real urgency that they look at what's happening with their parks. But this was done collaboratively between the design community and the Parks Department. a massive document. You can download this thing, and it's some of it's a bit boring, but actually all the intent is there to actually think about parks in a bigger, broader light in terms of issues like sustainability, climate change, best practices through design and construction and maintenance. So there you have, that's an image of maintenance. It's funny, the document has really nice but very pixelated images of the design ideas, but they very thoughtful idea about bringing design to issues of how do you deal with intensification in parks, how do you deal with maintenance of parks in a broad way, and it also then allows the municipality to say, well, we really have to focus on establish our priorities and figure out what we can do, addressing the complexity of the issues that face the Parks Department with its massive inventory. And the end of that is we're talking about high quality design where we can actually start to think of things that we've never thought of before and make spectacular parks. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Oh, okay. Okay, I got a lot more slides than everyone else I've noticed so far, so I'm going to go pretty quick, and you're just going to cut me off if I run out of time. I start by giving credit to someone else, John Lorink, who wrote an amazing series of articles called Parks in Crisis, which was in spacing, and the first one, with the best title, said all built up and no place to go. And that's Toronto's dilemma. And it's probably the biggest question we face in this current very exciting era. And if you don't have one of those or one of those, then what do you do? Well, I think it's already been said, Toronto has the islands. It's almost like our Central Park. It's not connected in the same way, but if it could be either physical or kind of metaphorically connected to us, then it joins in with the ravines, our other biggest green resource, which is 100% Toronto and fantastic. People call it our backyard. I think it's up front. They kind of combine together to what you have to kind of think of as like a big green hug. It's like Toronto's big green hug, and it's a kind of a subtle and quiet hug, but it's there. Quantity versus quality, or quality versus quantity. We're not going to win the quantity game anymore because our city is developed whether we like it or not, and maybe in some ways that notion of densification or intensification runs somewhat contrary to traditional forms of quantity. So what does quality mean in terms of public design? A new dialogue is starting regarding that, in terms of not just the quality of the materials or the way that a place looks, but how can we actually inspire people to use this common ground? And that's, I guess, ties in with the last point I'm making here, is there's a growing gap. We're told that there's a growing gap in Toronto, and that gap materializes itself in a difference of wealth. There's almost two cities. Public space is the common ground, and that's why it's the biggest topic to us. But what we are very good at doing in Toronto is making connections. So when we connect all these disparate and maybe smaller places together, then they start to become more powerful, and the whole is truly greater than the sum of its parts. A couple of projects just to serve as examples of a couple of lines of thinking. This is an established neighborhood. It's a planning project which envisioned a public realm approach for MidTown. MidTown is a young in Eglinton. It's the area all around it. Welcome to MidTown. MidTown already has the TTC, the subway. We're getting an LRT, as you all, I'm sure, know. There's about 20,000 people arriving there in the near future, so there is a need for space. We put this study together, which was finished sometime this year. Okay, the vision was that Midtown is really two things. It's traditional Toronto, where you get wonderful semis, the individual houses, green lots, big trees, and it's intensification at a rate which is second only to the hub in the downtown around Union, or maybe King West. Midtown's public realm will articulate a proper balance in the design of its parks, streets, squares, and open space network by drawing upon two inherent attributes: its urban vitality and its lush green spatial character. to create a memorable identity and enriched experience at the crossroads of Toronto. Problem being that if you look at MIDTOWN on the left and versus the same kind of problems we see in all neighborhoods in Toronto, King West, Leslieville, we're only at a point where we generally have about 5 to 7% of our land which is parks. There's a quantity issue again. MIDTOWN has an extrapolating problem that it only has 23% of its built fabric is roads or streets, the other kind of common ground. So 30% of it is actually available to the public and not a development. I'm going to go through these quickly. Hey, how am I doing?
You're at 4 minutes.
It's not bad. It's better than I thought. MIDTOWN moves. Okay, there was 5 things, and these are a series of hybrid public space initiatives that form the backbone of a transformed public realm for MIDTOWN. So it wasn't necessarily a park or a street or a pop. You all know what pops are, I'm sure. But it was maybe a combination of all these things which came together and made a more powerful experience. So the MIDTOWN moves. We're going to go through them one by one, and then they transpose over what would become kind of a resilient living plan, which is both purposeful yet also flexible enough to anticipate things that we don't know yet. And that would be the framework plan. So moving number 1, Eglinton Park and the Green Line. Eglinton Park is Eglinton Park. And the Green Line is a notion that you can extend that experience of a park along a street. And it would extend by a series of very green but incredibly urban spaces, which would be almost typical, like kind of a twist on the Tower in the Park typology, where you all know what that is. It's not really a park, it's a parking lot. But it's the notion that buildings actually sit back and frame public space in a positive manner. Move number 2 was the Yonge Street Squares. There is no Dundas Square, there's no Times Square, there's no square at Yonge and Eglinton. In fact, the square that there was has just been reduced significantly in size. So it's an observation that instead of having a single square or a single place, can we connect a lot of things together and actually start to make an experience which is almost like a linear square. And maybe it takes in districts, squares on all corners of the street itself, parks, pops, but it becomes a transformed experience of something which right now feels almost like a highway and spans from uptown to downtown. We said they should pilot it. They haven't yet. We'll keep trying. Move number 3, the Park Street Loop. This is the notion that a street, this is going in an east-west manner, and it connects or anchors 2 green public spaces, but the street itself becomes almost like a park. So we're somewhat familiar with this notion. If we look at Boston, for instance, that's a view up looking out towards Boston Common and the Boston Public Garden, but streets can actually form a function beyond just getting you from A to B. There can actually be a place, and when those places are connected, it seems somehow all the more powerful. So the Park Street Loop was really a retrofit of streets. Again, we can't imagine that we're going to completely redo the street network within MIDTOWN, but it took what we already had, this kind of space, for one thing, wide streets, and reimagined how we can use them and live with park-like attributes under the amazing tree canopy. Similarly, if I'm talking too quick, just wait. Similarly, the MIDTOWN greenways, these are all the other streets that form a network. They become just lush and green and great places with cycling connections and also connecting you out to the ravines that we mentioned earlier. Move number 5, Red Path. This is a street that exists. It's one that doesn't go all the way through, but it terminates at a church on the south side and a very small park on the north side. We're going to make the park on the north side bigger, turn the church area into a park, and then the connection between them becomes a different kind of street, particularly at the intersection of Eglinton, where you have the possibility of a street which isn't like Yonge Street and it's not like Bayview, but it's actually a local street and it could function as a shared street. The shared street, as you know, is a place where we let vehicles in, but there is a guest. It balances all users and it feels predominantly like public space. Put them together, back them out, that's the moves. We kind of calculated if you did all of these things, you go from a 7% of traditional open space, which by the way, 6.9% is in Eglinton Park itself, and you would end up somewhere around 14%, 8 minutes, okay. And you would be anywhere with, where you used to be 6 minutes away from a park, you'd now be 4 minutes. I'm going to try and do the Portlands in 3 or 4 minutes. Is that cool? Okay. Because it really doesn't need much longer than 3 or 4 minutes only to Portland's. Toronto Portland's vision and structure. There's been a ton of visions for the Toronto Portland's, and there's been a few visions that have kind of landed on it. And this was an important moment in the history of the Portland's. You'll know this from, I'm sure, site. This is the vision that Doug Ford bought in about 2013, I'm guessing 2012. It marked a time when suddenly we're used to visions and visionaries, and then someone comes along and lands something on a place and you just say no. So you go through a process, which we did, in terms of going back to the public and saying, well, what should it be then? If it's not someone's vision, can it be our vision? And how do we figure out what a vision is? We did a 2-day workshop where ideas were brought together. And we actually took people out. Importantly, we didn't just walk people around. We took them on a boat, because it's the Portland's, and we tasked them with taking pictures or recording images that they think make the one and only Portland's, and we called them the exceptions and the exceptional. Barely need to describe these, because these are what we got back, and they kind of tell their own story. And I think that the story is that there's already a there. Anything from remnant industry to active industry, from nature to water. There's already a place. So to just simply impose something on it seems to be giving it short shrift. This is one of my favorites. So together they make the one and only Portland's, and then what do we do with that information in terms of connection? Well, first, when we were doing MIDTOWN, it was a retrofit of streets, but what would it mean to actually design streets as places from the get-go? 6 signature streets that stitch, that's tough to say. The Portland's in the south and east and back to the city. So this was a notion that 6 major streets. Okay, how long do I have, seriously? 2 minutes? I'll try. Okay. 6 major streets, which each of them were a journey. They were an experience. So they were an experience in what they connected, but they were an experience as you were being connected. They were all different, and their position within the city maybe informed their experience within the Portland. So that's the best view in the city, as we all know, over Riverdale Park. That's what Broadview could do in terms of connecting from the ravine all the way down to the Hearn Hub. And that's what it could look like in terms of a framework plan, where this kind of, it's almost like the chimneys are actually bolder than the towers. 2 streets as places, east-west, 3 east-west systems, 2 of them streets, one of them actually not a street. It's a waterway, but no less notable, the ship channel, and what that can mean in terms of, I'm going real fast now. The green, so put them together, and then this is what we call a traditional kind of green system, the Parks and Open Space Network. It's a series of places, and if we use a diagram, they're incredibly diverse. They shouldn't all try and be the same thing. But maybe the point of the Portland's is that we can ask a question, is there more to it than that? And is there an expanded open space network which is actually green and blue? Toronto is always known, or maybe I just make this up, but it seems to be known as a city by the lake. It's possible that when you take that same circle and you lay it over the Portland's, that you're actually split with a different ratio. About a third of it is open space, it's green, it's wild. About a third of it may be built up, but a third of it is actually water. And if you take that notion of a switch in perception as to what the figure in the ground is, and you do that in terms of, like, this is a Nolly diagram of the buildings, you switch it to the public realm, you get one result. If you include in the public realm water, you get a different result. So suddenly you notice that the proliferation is actually the open space. It outnumbers the buildings 2 to 1. We know this from a number of cities. I don't need to even explain, where there is a different notion of what water means in the city. You're not just next to it, it's in the city. And we can only imagine what that could mean in terms of public space. And again, if you're designing for Portland, you're thinking of 50-year range. So the way that we interact with water, on water, in water, could be very different by the time a lot of the initiatives in this plan come to fruition. Could it be that it's a water square? You know, we look around the world and there's so many different ways that we can imagine water being relevant in an open space system. And it could be incredibly relevant here, where it forms part of the intrinsic nature of the framework plan. Last 4 slides. Structure plan. So you put all these things together. You take stitching to the city, uniting the harbour and the wilds. a resilient urban fabric, which we didn't get time to talk about, and the green and blue. You lay them over the exceptions and the exceptional, and then that becomes the structure plan for the Portlands. Positive yet resilient, able to be changed, yet able to pick the things that we want to set in place now as to how we want to live in a city in the 21st century, connecting some of Toronto's most significant, existing and future open spaces, both blue and green. Thank you.
It's so interesting to hear my colleagues speak. I found it incredible, and I'd like to speak to you each individually. And I agree with a lot of the conversations that we've had, but I can't help but sort of fall back on the fact that 8 in 10 people are all going to live in cities in North America. And you know, I like to dream about all sorts of wonderful things, but the reality is that every time I go downtown, I don't recognize anything because of the quality of buildings that are there. And it's not just about the fact that the intensification is wiping out all green space. It's also really about the fact that that our environment is really changing. And it's really landscape architects, I believe, who are in the position to make some of the changes that need to happen to our cities. I just came back from the American Society of Landscape Architects, and the whole conversation there out of 4 days of lectures were really about heat island effects, ecologies, water, new systems, to look at really new systems, resilience, and how we work all that, and how we value landscape spaces, which I know everybody here really does, but there's a whole educational quality that has to happen to a number of people outside who understand the value of them. And I always like to make the point that nobody understands perishables. We are in the perishable business, which is very different than anybody else's business. So what we do really does need to be maintained, and things will die if we don't pay attention to them. So everybody's got different statistics, of course, but there are 1,500 parks over 8,000 acres, representing, I say, or my office says, 13% of the city. That doesn't include the ravine systems. And although we talk about the ravine systems as being so important as a new green asset, and there's all these wonderful plans for the green ribbon, what we don't talk about, and what I want to talk about, is the fact that our ravines really are taking all the water from the 905 area. And there's real issues in terms of how we deal with that water and what their effects are on our ravine system. So although Antonio told me I had to be really positive tonight, I think that we have to talk about the realities. Our ravine systems are so special. They're really the defining element of Toronto. But, you know, we're always looking for the voices of the people who have the values and actually talk about the stuff that nobody wants to talk about. And that is, you know, what does this level of intensification do to all the systems that we have, and to all the parks we have? You know, we look at Vancouver, and Vancouver actually has smaller park footprint per capita than Toronto, but I think that because they have the mountains, and because they have the water, and because they have easy access to the country, it's defined differently. They have all those wonderful islands like Bowen Island that you can get to in 10 minutes, and I think it's different from that point of view. And I think that, you know, the High Line is incredibly successful. I mean, it's not like, it was a great idea, but when you have to look around Toronto with our level of intensification and say, what great ideas, like we really have to learn to be a little bold and suggestive of great ideas that maybe people will frown upon, but at the end of the day become really great public spaces. And I have to say, you know, I applaud Dave Harvey, because, you know, Parks People has been so incredible. You've done it in a different fashion in terms of engaging people, but it's the people that you engage that actually make positive spaces out of spaces that really don't work otherwise. And, you know, the High Line's overloved because of the use, and people come back to me and say, oh my goodness, have you seen the High Line? And I always go, like, yeah, it's just like a nice walkway. Like, we can have that in Toronto. It's like, it's not, you know, somebody spent a lot of money. And I think the other thing that we really have to talk about is we have to talk about how good design really makes good business. We did a study at some point of Millennium Park and the High Line, and they all showed that the level of the level of use, how good it was for economic development, how the prices of real estate went up around it was so significant. And even with Millennium Park, the amount of money they make out of the parking garage underneath it is so important that, parks are not just about taking away. It's incredible in terms of what they can give back to a neighborhood from an economic development point of view. I look at H2O Park, which was the first park that was done by the waterfront. It was actually done through City of Toronto Parks Department. After that, the waterfront parks all became done through Waterfront Toronto, who never speaks about the H2O Park because they weren't involved with it. But when all the work was done, and people were asked, what do they really want? They all wanted grass. They wanted grass. It didn't have to be expensive, although it's always wonderful to put something really a little kitschy there. And I think the first urban park, the first urban beach, we thought, are people really going to come with their chairs? Are they really going to, put their toe in the water? Like, are we dreaming? And then, of course, that's what happened. I mean, people come in their bathing suits and they try to put their toe in the water. And it was so successful that there's now another one. And, urban beaches everywhere in the world have been really successful. And I can honestly say that would not have been happened if we had had to go through an approval process with the Parks Department. Joe Pantalone was the champion of that and worked it through all of City Hall. And the last thing was liability. What are we going to do? Somebody can drown, even to the point where we had to work with the insurance agent. So great design really needs a champion. I'm so much a believer of that. I'm so much a believer in that you need a champion who really believes and ushers it through. So there's my HTO and the umbrellas. This was probably done for 10% of what Sugar Beach was done for. So it shows you what your budgets are like, which versus Waterfront Toronto. And I really encourage the Parks Department to ask developers for much more money to build your parks so they can be much greater than they are. Joel Weeks Park, I want to show because I think that it's sort of about the reverse of the suburbs, how in this development here, it was about geared to people's income as well as profit. And although it was only 1 hectare, the park had a pretty powerful civilizing effect. And I would say I become very humble when I go to these public meetings, and I understand what people really want. Although we love to do the sexy, intense urban parks, when we do the ones that are really surrounded by community, it has a whole different level of basic responses that people need to what they need to live a healthy life. And we take these situations and we try to make them iconic. We try to make them special. We try to give them a story behind it. Because this is beside the Don River, we tried to use plant material that was conducive to what you would find along the river and to give it that sort of soft quality so it wasn't sort of over-designed and looking like everything else. And it's become incredibly successful based on that. And then, I would say that because 95% of our urban environment is made up of streets and sidewalks, what we've been talking about in terms of our streets and the limitations of what we can do with them now that they're all built and where the buildings are. These POPs, I really question them, but we've just finished our first POP, and it came from urban design. The developer paid for it. It had a piece of public art. And to me, it's really it's a great piece of animated space that's actually has to be taken care of by the developer. And it's also about the edges. They've got a great ice cream store there that everybody lines up for, and that's really sort of animated as well. And I'd like to just show 18 Yorkville as I sort of wrap up. This was an underground garage that we put a park on top of. We've had 2 situations now where developers have wanted to put parks on top of parking, and we've been told that there's no money for maintenance, which we understand. But I think that we really have to look for creative ways of getting some space into the downtown area. These condos are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And there's just no place for people to go. There's no terraces, there's no sidewalks, there's not any of these beautiful sidewalks, there's maybe little pops, and I'm afraid that the waterfront, which really has the park systems now, is just going to be overloved by everybody, because that's all there is. And then again, our urban forest, which, people don't realize that these are working trees. The trees on the streets are working. They're the first line of defense for all the chemicals and pollution that happens, and how important it becomes. And the statistics are now showing the science that, trees, I think, is 40% less money in terms of heating and cooling, and how important that is. And I always believe if you have the science, then people will pay attention to you. And because I don't have a lot of minutes, there's my 209 per tree, 4 times the increase, 40% based on trees that get planted. And I think these are the things we have to talk about too in terms of values, because people need to know that the parks are really incredibly valuable and give value for what they have. And I'm going to go through this very quickly because I think that we're just involved. Public Works was as well with the design competition for U of T, King's College Circle. And I think that, these networks we're talking about become really critical. It's a campus surrounded by an incredible amount of towers, and how we really can sort of capitalize and move that forward. And in our scheme here, Queen's Park Circle is actually owned by the U of T, and how that could be. So I've used up all my time, although I didn't think I would. Thank you very much. I'll look forward to your questions. We need champions. We need people who really step forward and really care and really promote the public realm. I mean, we battle it every single day with developers, and we're only one singular voice, but if we could get some support for some and not be angry. That's what I'm trying to learn, not to be angry. I mean, we're involved with Honest Eds, and the park didn't come into there till after the planning was done. So I think that having a voice much earlier on helps, because now we're trying to figure out how to squeeze a park into a development that's already been done, and I think that happens very often. I think the Plannies really has a great leader now, and I think she gets what it's all about. And I think that parks, landscape architects have been pushed around for so long that we forgot how to ask for things and how to champion them. We see it because we work on the drawings, and we get these trees that are supposed to be planted beside underground garages, which doesn't even have any soil around it to let us survive. And we see these incredibly low amounts of money that you're forced to work with and that you're passing on to us to do the design. In a lot of cases, we don't even get involved because we don't think that we can do any great design with the money you pass on. And this is the younger generation. You guys are the younger generation, and my office is the younger generation. And I really think that the way everybody has had to, it isn't a Toronto thing, it's a North American thing. It's just that this has become so important with intensification and climate change that everybody's got to find their voice again and start talking about the real diversity that's involved. Michael.
I was going to say that if you look at, and actually it was interesting, Adam had a picture of Central Park and a picture of Millennium Park. And it's interesting when you think of governance models and who looks after those parks. And so Central Park was in a totally dismal state 20 years ago. And a conservancy gradually got built that actually worked with the Parks Department to make Central Park work. That's a very common model now in the United States. It's got some problems, it's got pros and cons, it's a whole interesting thing to talk about. Millennium Park had a huge amount of funding outside the city. So actually the public art process was not a public art process. But a very interesting, so high quality spaces are actually created through, there's different kind of arrangements for doing things. And I just wonder whether there's some question about can we look at other models about how we can all work together.
Yeah. David, I'm wondering, do we need to be a little bit angry? Janet says we can't be angry. Should we be a little bit angry?
I think we need to have a high bar, and we need to be shooting for that high bar. And it's not about angry. I think it's about that there's a need for it, and that we need to find those solutions. And I think the champions are out there, and I think you're seeing the champions in the general public. When you go to Trinity Bellwoods Park on a weekend, and you see the thousands of people are out there, those are the champions. Like, I think, you must see it in the Parks Department. The parks are used so much more than they used to be, and those are the people who are wanting those, great parks and experience those parks. So I think they're the ones that are telling the design community, the Parks Department, their councilors that they want to have a high bar here. And I think the time's really right in Toronto for some of these solutions.
Alex, where are our champions?
I agree. Well, this is really loud. I agree with Dave that they're certainly seeing a lot more community consultation. I mean, when I first started at Parks, it was 2011. One of the first things I did actually was read your paper. And because I didn't know much about what was going on with Toronto Parks at all. I came from design build, and it was interesting to hear that about this culture of no, because my first experiences working with parks were not about that. Maybe I was just lucky. Maybe it was where I was working, but I found I was doing a lot of community consultation, and I was getting to really hear from people, and it really turned me on to my job. And I thought, this is such an amazing thing to be involved with. This this real city building. Now that I've been here for 4 years, I've sort of started to see that that's not across the board, and that the city is very diverse. But I think when you get to know the people at City Hall, and you get to know the politicians, and you get to know the councillors, and you get to start having this dialogue with them, they can very often be your champions as well. But it is really about explaining to people, or to those people that have that control, how vital the investment in parks is, and how it doesn't always take a lot of money. I mean, money certainly helps, but that even small opportunities can really yield great things.
Adam, I can see you biting your tongue, and then we'll open up.
I'm not biting my tongue. I'm also not angry. But I guess I would add.
Though you did have something to say against monorails and.
I didn't see, you know what, that's actually a good segue, because when we talk about leadership, there's some obvious kind of top-down models, and they're absolutely relevant. There's also leadership which I've seen, even in my time in Toronto, which has kind of taken my breath away. But the monorail, for instance, if we even talked about that, the notion of taking back the Portlands from this kind of singular vision was led by regular person. I'll credit Julie Beddoes, but there was a bunch of other people, Cindy Wilkie, who just kind of went out and they polled, and they went to the distillery district, I think. They got 2,000 names in a day, and then it just snowballed, and then suddenly it was a civic movement that you couldn't stop, which basically said, you know what, forget about Chicago, forget about New York, we're Toronto, and we're proud of it. And I think that's maybe something that you guys have got to start to get into your heads. It's like, but you're not Chicago, and that's okay. And you're not Toronto, you're not New York, and that's okay. And you're not Paris, and that's okay. Because I actually really love living in Toronto right now. I think it's one of the most exciting cities in the globe, with its problems, but diversity is its strength. But we are always used to this notion that someone's going to come from somewhere else and tell us how our city's going to get better, how our parks are going to get better. They'll have a singular vision which will be so spellbinding, you'll just faint. And I think what we're realizing, and I think it's like, I credit other people more than me on this, particularly Dave, is that the leadership is coming from within, and all the time we're debating what the singular vision is. Everyone's vision, our vision, is kind of taking fruition, and it's coming from the ground up, and culture just kind of, it just thrives in Toronto in the weirdest ways, and I think that's one of the most amazing reasons to be here right now.
We've talked a lot about capital and the need for new capital for new parks and more improved parks. And there is a challenge with that, but there's fairly significant dollars out there, and there's some significant challenges, as Alex outlined, about getting some of those dollars flowing and those projects flowing. But the real challenge, and I think there's a lot of champions for, yes, we need to spend a lot of money on capital for parks, but we need those champions, we need those solutions on the operating side. I don't think we've quite educated the public enough yet that when you build that Highline type park, that beautiful park, that's great, but it's really expensive to maintain, and people want to use them very intensively and program them a lot, and the city does not have those resources at that time. And I think there's some outside funders that can support some of that, but I think that's one of the issues that we really need to educate people at City Hall and others on, is the need for more operating dollars for parks.
I was just wondering, in your experience, how do you deal with, like, one of the things that we have when we have people that are interested, we get the people that are like, wouldn't it be great? So wouldn't it be great if we had a community garden? But then, you know, it's sometimes challenging those people to understand that would be great, but, you know, we need something structured, or we need some commitment from the community before we're going to go build that. And we often get that where, wouldn't it be great, and why can't we do it, and why can't we take it? But then we don't get and I'm just wondering if you've encountered that as well with some of the groups that you work with.
Oh, most definitely, and particularly, again, a lot of it's more on the capital side, that, you know, we go out and have a community meeting with a community and about their park, and it's like, wouldn't it be great if we had a splash pad, and wouldn't it be great if we had new basketball courts, and there's not going to be money for that. But I think there's a real opportunity to turn the, you know, wouldn't it be great, instead of going, well, you know, again, it's just not, and we've mentioned a few times, and I don't use that phrase anymore, this culture of no thing, but that it's, because I think there has been progress in the city since I wrote that report, and it's not and I think it's great to have people like yourself and others who are here in the room. So it's not about, well, here's the challenges of doing a community garden, and therefore we can't have a community garden. There are some challenges around a community garden, and here's how you can work with the city, you can work with outside partners to try to make that happen. Yeah. And that, you know, that's just I think a real positive change that's been happening in the city. So it's
definitely the way we like to see it happen.
Yeah,
too.
exactly.
I mean, I think community engagement is always a good idea, but I do wonder sometimes whether it's a problem or not. And I think I got to say dog parks. I actually think they're horrible things, and they're eroding our park system. And just saying it.
That's the topic for the next TSA session.
Absolutely, there may be a venue to just get people together to talk about parks, and maybe this was supposed to be it, and then maybe we all broke the rules. But why did we? Well, we talked about things other than parks, maybe because we're talking about opportunity, I think. We're talking about an area of, you know, people have an idea what a park is, and we're pretty set on how much parks we have now because of the way that the city's developed and land ownership is the way that it is, but there'll be no dramatic shift in the amount of park we have. So in the Toronto model, where we don't have a benefactor that's going to give us another massive park downtown, it's interesting, and it's a subject which kind of engages me, which is like that instead of limiting the topic to park, but you expand it to public realm, and then parks are one component of that. They're important, and they're absolutely different to, as you said, to a street or a boulevard or a park, or I don't know, all kinds of wonderful things. But when you combine them all together, you get more than just the area you create with the connection of the thing, but it somehow just feels like more. And I think that Toronto's been pretty good at that. And I think we're getting better at it, and I think that that's going to be the next, I think, big thing in terms of public realm. And that we don't, like, you know, when you talk about a park, for instance, you talk about the consultation. I know what you mean, you know, but you get, it's almost like becoming like an exercise in polling. You know, who can think of something which would go in a park, and don't you wish you had it? So you have certainly 99 things to go in a 1 acre park, and that's never going to really work. But if we look at an expanded public realm network, and we give people the context to understand that it's not just this one little patch of land next to you, you have, you know, citywide connections of things that you can use in unison with each other, that we help them to frame a bigger discussion, which is, yes, parks, but not just parks.
Great. So, Michael, if you can get us started, and then we'll actually
Can I just respond to that?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm truly confused about what a park is and isn't. I mean, 18 Yorkville's all paved. It has no playground equipment. It's taken care of by Parks and Recreation. Martha Schwartz is on Yorkville as well. the POPs I know are urban design, but I think there's a real issue in terms of clarity of where urban design comes in and where parks is. And I think the streetscape has to do with that too, because I agree with Adam that it's all part of the systems now that we're looking at that are critical. And once I have the mic in my hand, I do want to say that I think our green parks are being overloved. If you look at the parks that are so incredibly successful, Dave, my fear is that we're overloving them, they're being trampled, the tree canopies are dying, and even though they're incredibly successful because people are using them now, there's not even a place to sit down on a July or August on a weekend because they're being so overloved. So I still fall back to the fact that we don't have enough space downtown. We've got to find creative ways of getting it.
So, Michael, jump in.
I was going to push really quick. Oh, sorry.
No, jump in, but then you'll have a little bit more of the word.
Yeah.
And we'll just go around and see if there's a call to action in all of this. So.
Okay. In terms of Tammy's question, I think it goes back to what I was originally talking about literacy. Do we actually understand the typologies of our urban spaces, and do we actually define them as different, and do we actually understand what they're about? And I think that's why the design community can actually play a significant role in this, in kind of exploring, if we understood how these spaces have evolved and what they are, what's a POP? Like, what are those things? How should they function? What should they be like? It's interesting. I once was in a conversation with one of the fellows who designed Paley Park, and he said at the time they designed pocket parks, they were also talking about doing pocket zoos. The pocket zoos just never got off the ground. But the idea that we could actually think of new typologies for space, and that parks play a specific role in that. And I think we just, it is muddy, and just as Janet said, we really need to, I think some clarity about the sense of ideas and definitions would be great.
Thank you. Dave?
And my closing comment is going to be a response to Tammy, and I absolutely, to the core of my being, I believe it is wrong to just talk about city parks, because people experience public open spaces, and that's what they care about, not about who administers what. So it's about serving the public's need, and so that should come first. And so, but I think a real challenge is that, and this is my closing comment part, that it's about operating dollars, and that so it's that we haven't solved in the city. You know, we're getting some really interesting ideas, like some of those greenway ideas, but we actually haven't solved, like, well, who's going to maintain those? And that's so it's tough for park staff who are, you know, trained and have the equipment and have the need to go out and, you know, take care of this park space. But now there's this open streetscape, and how's that going to be maintained? And so we need these kind of creative solutions with very densifying neighborhoods, very expensive land to meet those needs. So we need, you know, every kind of open space, how we connect to those in the systems. But we also need a way of, like, how we're going to program that and how we're going to maintain all that collectively, because it can't just be, well, parks will take care of that and that's their problem.
Janet?
Well, have I not said enough? I just always think of the poor woman who wakes up at 6 o'clock in the morning, gets her kid breakfast, puts her on the bus, takes her to school, goes to work, picks her up at the end of the day and comes home and do the same thing over and over again after making dinner. And I think, like, where is the pleasure of the day? You know, and the pleasure of the day should be what happens outside while she's waiting for the bus, while she's letting her kids play. Like, those again go back to sort of my basic values. But I also believe that a city like Toronto, as all other cities in the world, have an economic development drive that happens because of their public spaces. That's why everybody goes to these cities, and why, you know, when you go to Chicago, which I was on the weekend, everything is like packed full of tourists, because they come to spend their dollar monies because the public spaces are so rich and so important. And I think that that we can't forget that. And when I look at, like, University Avenue is beautiful, but, like, why can't we have more than that? I mean, you guys are, like, fabulous with it. I just think it's, like, such one little example. I think the city looks really tired and really unloved for most of the time. And if we can't seem to find our champions, although we have in certain areas, and is that we need to make the economic development discussion, just as I did with Richard Ovens when we did the Toronto Cultural Foundation here. I begged for money and time and people to make our parks look great, and they told you could make them good. For Pan Am, they gave you some more money. But that should be something that happens on a yearly basis. We should be thinking about that.
Adam, is there a call to action? You can use 2 mics if you want.
Call to action. I think there's the very fact that discussions like this are happening and that we're getting purposely invigorating questions like Natami's, where she's trying to gauge a reaction really rather than saying that should it just be parks. We get that, and that's great. And I think that we can come together and talk about parks with the Toronto Society of Architects is pretty great. There's a dialogue in the city which hasn't existed before, and I'd say, and I'm no expert, I've only been here 13 years, but it seems to be reaching a crescendo, and it's pretty exciting. And I think part of the dialogue is that we used to always look at what's shiny and new and beautiful and expensive and figure out how to pay for it, and there's been very good points that you have to also figure out how to keep paying for it, because we like the ribbon cutting, but we don't like the amount of money it takes to look after it for the next 20 years, which is the same as the initial investment. But I think there's a dialogue about experience, and but we can't plan for everything. But we used to think that if we consult enough people or have enough experts, that we kind of are going to figure out what to do. What I think we're starting to do now, and what we need to do more, is actually look at places, see how people use them, and focus on experience. And that's not necessarily a money issue, and it's not a planning issue unless planning evolves to keep monitoring and looking at things in action, real life, not just on a page, and then have mechanisms that we can make adjustments to spaces and places so that we keep making them better. And I think that's both a top-down and a bottom-up, a grassroots kind of experience. Did that make sense?
You get the final word.
I get the final word, wow. Well, I'd just like to say that this is really, I'm really, so pleased that I could be here and sort of to borrow from Jennifer Keesmatt to sort of get out of the weeds and think about the the what ifs and the what could be. But I think that it's important to realize too that the what is really encouraging, and that there's a lot of good people in parks, and I'm seeing a lot of positive changes happening, so that when we're right now having to go to public meetings with $125,000 to do a new playground, that we are engaging people still with those little budgets, that we are looking at what we can do to stretch those budgets, to add to them, to make improvements, to combine with other projects, that we're really in the trenches and in the weeds, and that there's a lot of good people in parks fighting to keep this going in the right direction.